Mental health, also a major focus in this year's federal budget. Crisis support services have been under increasing pressure as lockdown and economic uncertainty worsens Australia's mental health crisis. A total of $2.3 billion will be spent on mental health, and that includes $1.4 billion of federally funded mental health centres. Almost $300 million will be invested in suicide prevention measures too. $250 million will be used to improve access to digital support services. Joining me now live is the Chair of Lifeline, John Brogden. John Brogden, thank you so much for your time. We've talked so much about what is needed in this space. It's not just money, but it sure does help.
There's no doubt about that. This has been a big budget for mental health, and it, I think, is focusing particularly on suicide prevention, which is so critical in Australia. More than 3,000 Australians are likely to take their own lives during this year. That's an average of 9 Australians taking their lives every day, 7 men and 2 women on average. So this is a real dilemma, and what we're seeing here are significant increases in funds.
And how do you want to see this money spent? We talk about suicide prevention, but I don't really know what that means. What does it mean to you?
Well, it means dealing with the whole spectrum. Suicide is largely a preventable cause of death, by which I mean, Laura, if you get to people at the right stage, if you get them the help they need exactly when they need it, or if you get it beforehand in terms of dealing with them and helping them through a crisis, there's a very large ability to reduce suicide, to stop that person from taking their own life. So what we're seeing are services for mental health that will help a larger number of people get the help that they need, and in many cases, we hope, we'll see them stop short of suicide because they're getting the help they need. In Lifeline's budget, we're seeing a new program funded by the federal government, which is the first ever 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander helpline, if you like, an Aboriginal lifeline. And this is really critical because it is a great tragedy that the rate of suicide of Indigenous Australians is double the rest of the country, double. And because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have many issues that are different to us around death, we need to do this with a specific sensitivity towards the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So we'll be staffing this line with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as well. So this is the big initiative for us. We're also seeing a continuation. It's $2.5 million. It's not a massive amount of money, but it's the money we need to continue our specific bushfire service for another 12 months. Do you know, Laura, here we are, 18 months after the bushfires got severe in December 2019, and Lifeline is still receiving between 200 and 400 calls every day from Australians affected by the bushfires. So we should not forget those people. We should not move on so quickly. We need to continue to support those people. So there's $2.5 million to allow us to continue a bushfire-specific service.
John Brogden, that is such a great reminder, and it's heartbreaking to hear that
Yeah.
You know, we've had this global pandemic which has taken the focus of everything. We still need to remember those Australians. I mean, 200 to 400 calls a day.
Yeah.
It just shocks me, I've got to say. But I think what has shown us over the last year, John, is that I think Australians are getting better at asking for help. But we just need to have those services there that when they do ask for help, they're not going to get radio silence.
That's exactly right. And that's why the money that will be into community centres, the continuation of support for people to do their counselling sessions online. Bearing in mind, when we shut everything down, that meant that people who had regular appointments with psychologists and psychiatrists and counsellors were worried that they wouldn't be able to contact them. They'd be locked in their home. The government responded quickly to allow telesessions, just like this, between people with their psychologist, psychiatrist, counsellor, and that was fantastic as well. Your point about people reaching out is so right. Do you know, some years ago, we all would have thought, gee, that's no good that Lifeline's getting more calls. That means there's something wrong. I think we've flipped the coin now, and what that means is it's a good thing because people are reaching out. So I do hope that calendar year 2020 was a turning point for mental health in Australia in terms of people being more comfortable about asking for help when they need it. But you're right, when they want that help has to be there. One of the other, I think, really important initiatives in this budget is around 160 million to increase what we call aftercare services. So the largest single indicator of a suicide attempt is a previous suicide attempt. So if you're in a clinic or even out in the community and you've had a suicide attempt, what the government's going to put some significant funding in, and they're looking for the states to match it, is everybody who's had a suicide attempt in Australia, which is much more than those, of course, who complete their suicides. But for everybody who's had a suicide attempt in Australia, there's an aftercare. They're getting looked after immediately after that happens, rather than saying, you're okay now, back on the streets or back to your job or back to home. And I can't emphasise just how important that is, because when you get through a suicide, and as you know, Laura, I've been in this situation myself, but I've been in a very dark place. When you come through the other side, you need help to keep getting better and to keep yourself in a situation where you're healthy and where suicide is not an option. So there's an enormous amount of money. This is a big budget for mental health, and we want to see these funds drive down suicide in Australia.
Absolutely, and it is a good start indeed. And I sit here pretty positive about the direction of this morning and the politics of it, to be quite brutal and crass about it. Are you? Yeah,
look, I am. Scott Morrison has made a very personal commitment to suicide, and that suicide prevention, and that commitment from Scott Morrison has now been backed up with money. And let's see that money flow through. Let's see it make a difference. If we need to adjust it, if we need more, we'll be asking for more. But if we need to adjust it to the right places, I'm sure the government will be flexible. But we do have an assistant minister, David Coleman, for suicide prevention. So this is actually a phrase that appears in the title of an assistant minister in the Australian government. The opposition has one as well. That's really important. So many years ago, Prime Ministers just didn't talk about suicide, let alone suicide prevention. It was verboten. It was a taboo to talk about it. You know that as a journalist. I think we've come a long way, but now we have to rely on making sure we see that reduction. As you said at the beginning, it's not only about money. We need people to put their hand up, and we need people to know that there is hope and there is help in organisations like Lifeline and with GPs and others. So don't suffer in silence. As I always like to say when we talk, Laura, don't suffer in silence. Don't sit back and think nobody cares. People do care. Go out and get the help you need. And if that help isn't out there, Lifeline and the mental health sector will be asking for more funds this time next year.